and you proposed, your own favourite model. And in speaking about self-regulation, you asked the question, well, what do you do when it fails? Now, that for me presupposes an assumption that it has failed. But I haven't heard you make the case for why it's actually failed. And perhaps if you can speak about that a little bit more, and perhaps because I may not get an opportunity to speak again, just to maybe preempt something that may be raised. Often the British Press Complaints Commission, the PCC, I think is a very weak model of self-regulation. And one can certainly argue that what has failed there is not self-regulation per se, but a particular model of self-regulation, a model of self-regulation that is implicitly designed to benefit owners and managers in the media and to cause minimal offence to the owners and the managers. And if one had to put self-regulation on a kind of continuum of weak to strong, one could perhaps put the British system on the weak end of the continuum, and perhaps Tanzania on the strong end of the continuum, because I think Tanzania and a number of other countries have shown us that there's nothing incompatible between a regulator having powers of investigation and a regulator having teeth, stronger enforcement mechanisms than what we've got in South Africa at the moment. There's nothing incompatible with that and self-regulation, but what has tended to dominate the kind of discourse globally has been a particular model of self-regulation that speaks to the needs and interests of owners rather than the media workers, the people actually inside the engine rooms of the newspapers.
Okay, I think we can take 2 more questions. We had 2 comments and a question. 2 more questions, and then we'll have it back to the panel. Oh, yes, sorry.
I just wanted to make a comment. Some of the stuff that I heard this afternoon. Sorry, my name is Wilson Manga. Some of the comments I heard this afternoon, especially the argument for statutory. Most of us look to. South Africa is the torchbearer of democracy in Africa. That it should be this tool of regulating the media. I agree with Takura. Which is not a good example in Africa. We should be moving away from simply not looking at this young man in Joe Thoro. Over last 37 years ago, when we both met on the world, nice to see you. And I just wanted to say the idea of self-regulation, the case is not to be made. I feel I agree with Ray, we should have regulations at all. In the case where we have influence now to decide whether to have self-regulation or statutory, then that is the next best thing.
Thank you very much. And then we will come back to the panel.
I'm Manj Makanya. I work in the South African media. Just to support what the press ombudsman has said very briefly about, I was just worried that there was a perception growing. I mean, like an acceptance that the self-regulation system was not working. And just want to say it was strong. I mean, it is strong. So it is strong. It does work. And there is almost full compliance. Here and there, but like generally, almost every single South African subscribes to the code and they and the types of sanctions and rulings that that the system has actually imposed on the media have been sometimes very harsh, and that we in the press have actually felt very unfair on us sometimes. And as I said before, I speak as a victim of that. I've been slapped down very viciously by the press ombudsman in the past, and so the system is working. But did it need strengthening? Absolutely, and we have always gone about trying to strengthen it, and there are reviews all the time, and the 2 recent reviews were part of that particular process. And we're moving towards a system that will be much stronger. We will probably need to strengthen it again in the future as conditions change. And I don't think, then the second point I want to make is that I think that it's a bit disingenuous of Lumko to say that there was no intention to control. I mean, like, there was a clear intention on the part of the ANC, and he was one of the people who were behind this thing, to move towards a system of statutory regulation. There was a culture of hostility towards the media within the ANC, and they were actually moving to a situation which was going to be very dangerous in us moving forward. So, but fortunately now, I think wise heads have prevailed, and the ANC is accepting the state where we're in now, where there will be a system of strengthened independent regulation of the media. And I just hope that we do not find ourselves in a situation where we have these debates, where we go back to debates that we should have put away before 1994. And I think that's where the likes of Lumko were taking us.
There's right of reply.
Correction. Thank you, Chairperson. Our next one is point number of questions. I still feel somewhat confused that I was not aware of what I was supposed to do. Stand because it would do to a number of things that I go at once. This is that I've gotten a lot of evidence now. There's nothing that says regulation. What people mean by says regulation and system of co-regulation, including the Tanzania one. If you hear what he said, it's not just the press that's part of it, it's other people. So actually in the world there is no place safe regulation. It's just a misnomer. It's just not true. So for example, in the South African case, Raymond spoke about there being six press representatives and 5 public members. That's not safe regulation. It's actually co-regulation together with the public. And I support that and that is a proper way to do it. I say that is correct because you see, I will repeat something that we in this debate we fail to recognize. What does the press do? It is the press or the media is an agency for the exercise of freedom of expression of the public or the citizens, not the press itself. And in this principle, I might not get a chance to answer Jay, but if I secrete my paper, I see. You have to ask, like, who is, then you have to ask, what is the relationship of the public? And one of the things we say, including what I've said today, the weakness of it is that we don't talk too much about the public. Whose freedom of expression in the media is actually facilitating, articulating, and allowing to happen. But it is not just for the press, because the press can be owned by any sort of boon and good person, and you can't rely on that. Whether the good person tomorrow becomes a boon, it happens all over the continent. I've seen people who fought for press freedom on the continent become cabinet ministers and own newspapers and influence newspapers, seeking to undermine press freedom, and sometimes actually succeeding. So I always rely on the democratic instincts of the citizen, what the Constitution protects. I wanted to answer also what Prajol said. I agree with a lot of the things he said, but I'll qualify them. I was telling him at lunch that I'm one person who reads a lot of newspapers. If I arrive in a country, one of the things I do is I sweep all of the newspapers, instruct the front desk to deliver newspapers at 5 a.m. in my home, even at the risk of waking me up. I read at least 5 South African newspapers a day. A Friday I was dealing with my failure to subscribe to certain newspapers because my subscriptions expired for a technical reason. It was Mondi's group actually. And I read them very religiously. I've read 3 Sunday papers this morning already. I'm sorry to say I skipped the dinner sessions because the newspapers were more interesting. However, that does not mean I'm totally satisfied. It just does it. The act of buying does not mean satisfaction. It also means to buy what is available. However, let me put it, my next statement is this. In what I read every day, reading 5 South African newspapers, 4 on a Sunday, I find instances of excellent journalism and instances of very bad journalism. Doesn't stop me from buying. That is the reality of the matter. I read other things on a weekly basis. Columbia Journalism Review, which they send an email every day analyzing the coverage of American newspapers and media on issues. I find the same. I find my colleagues find the same. Instances of excellence, instances of very bad journalism, instances of things that really, in some countries, they could actually be sanctioned. But I don't believe in sanctioning freedom of expression or using statutory power, arresting people and all of that. That does not promote democracy. So one of the things that is lacking in our discussion is too much a tendency to be defensive. And in being defensive, you don't talk actually, Raymond alluded to it, how do we improve our standards? That discussion is very muted. Why? And I can tell you why people are defensive. Because there are often threats and real threats from politicians against freedom of expression. It forces people to defend what is free space which could actually shrink. But it also does something. It forces them to censor themselves against thinking what could be the best if you actually had our freedoms and we could develop what we do. So in that respect, as you can see, I partly agree with Prajo, but I seriously disagree with him. Being a serious investor, like he rightly says, I wake up every morning, I authorize newspaper companies to take money from my bank account to pay for their newspapers. That does not mean I'm wholly satisfied. I wish you, and I'm going to attack you, you would really, using your media diversity and development agency, provide money to other people to start different newspapers so that they have greater choice and the competition for excellence. But you don't do that, but that for another day. No, to James' question.
Because of money.
Yeah. But to James' question is a very serious question, which, and I think I'll do like you did, I'll circulate my paper. So I would like to answer that question. I agree that there is no wholesale, willful violation and serious failures of ethical journalism that the misnamed co-regulatory institutions do not actually pick up. I know, for example, that quite a lot of Remongi is quite correct. Quite a lot of newspapers these days, actually, after this Boha, some newspapers, I think in Jovia is group independent newspapers. What they do now with their corrections is that they put they have a different color code beyond an apology. So it actually prominently stands out. They normally actually start these days their apologies on the front page, and you can follow it fairly prominently, and they don't say the innocuous things written, matter of fact, getting it right. We are sorry about what? When the original story was actually serious screaming headline. They don't. And I think that is where we should go. That for me is an instance of actually self-regulation. I like it when newspapers do it, even without the press ombudsman saying anything. When they get it right, get it wrong themselves and correct themselves. That's self-regulation. When the ombudsman has to come in, for me, there is another agency now coming to wake you up to the responsibilities that you should have. You thought you'd get away with it. No, you can't. And you should be slept on. What one would like to do, Jennifer, to answer you sincerely, is that one would have to do serious research evidence of what does one mean by actually failure. Because I think we're using it in a broad general term. What does one mean actually by failure? And I would say here, Jen and others, that context matters and also history matters. And your example was absolutely good. UK model being some of the weakest ones. One would have to take in individual societal contextual factors about what one calls failure in that particular context in relation to the performance of the media and journalists and the performance of the regulator there. Our friend from Tanzania, and I've been to your council, by the way, before your time. I was sent by MISA together with the history professor, he lived in Cape Town. Hendrik, some of you know. Hendrik and I did a huge study for MISA some few years back. One of it was to look at regulatory councils. We visited you, and it was in its formative stages in those days. I agree with most of what you said. But it will be interesting for us, you and I, to have a beer, but I don't drink, you can have a beer. To talk about that 2%, you say there's 98% in your estimation adherence. I'm interested in the 2%, and I hope it's not the big cases. The 98% is the small cases. So one would have to do contextual studies of what one means failure. But my second case around regulation is that we often too much talk about regulation as the sanctioning or the criticism of the bad things that have happened. What about the promotion of what should be good journalism, which is not something that one oneself judges, but one that way you develop the frontiers of expression and information. Some media, even when they are good, they suppress certain other voices because of other, and this is my last point, their ownership and other factors that work indirectly, not necessarily directly, to suppress freedom of expression. Media regulatory, whether they are called self-regulation, independent regulation, or what, will not catch those ones. And Columbia Journalism Review is good at doing that, and Pointer Institute as well. I think we should talk about all of this.
Lincoln, you want to say that?
Yes, I see the right of reply. Firstly, I think it would help all of us to focus on the substance of, because I think, Joel, you are right, that arising out of all this came very good outcomes that help us strengthen our profession, our systems, and we need to focus on those rather than they jump into defense. Both sides. I'm also fortunate, I happen to engage a lot with Tanzanian Media Council. I was doing a study for COMESA. I've been through a number of these institutions, and I happened to work in the continent years ago as part of the regulators for the broadcasting industry in the continent. So I know that context and the experiences there. But the point I wanted to raise is, certainly there is no way that we will go back to reversing the gains and therefore end up in the situation like in some of our neighboring countries. No way. I don't think so. At least not in my lifetime. I think the threat to media freedom is actually not these discussions. It's actually the number of questions around, from media monopoly to a number of other questions. But of course, that's a debate for another day, which also talks to the question, how are we promoting and encouraging diversity of views and opinions? And indeed, I agree 100% that we need to strengthen that so that we have diverse media, diverse views and opinions, and not have the situation like we do have currently, both from an ownership and control to news sources, who owns SAPA, etc. So there's a whole diversity challenges that we are facing in South Africa, which threatens media freedom more than the discussion that we're having. Brajo, I don't think these issues are myths. I mean, I can read from the report, the conclusions of the report says, I quote, not me, the preference for this system is in response to the expressed public dissatisfaction with the current system and with the public rejection of government's involvement in press regulation. Surely, the rejection, for it to not to be a myth, it would not be the rejection by our own selves, rejecting our own selves. It is the recipients of our work that would then reject, and then we need to be able to judge that and not dismiss it as a myth. So I think we need to read these things objectively and rationally, as you suggest. I think the question of standards, there's a lot of reports that have spoken to these things in terms of the standard of journalism in South Africa. Not only the PFC report, but there's also other reports that came before. The question of compliance and non-compliance would not be having. I also am a religious reader of newspapers. Even when I'm away from home, when I come back, I've got a pile, and I read them monthly, even if they are last week's newspapers, you know, because I have this passion and this religion of information. I really appreciate information. There wouldn't be these many apologies that we get every day. Even before you come in, you get a publication inaccurately today, tomorrow it apologizes. Surely, if you read the press code, it is against some of these practices. And this is where I'm saying that's the non-compliance. But I think where I started, let us not jump into our corners. Let us look at the good outcomes of these processes and focus on how best we come with a system that will best strengthen what is existing. Because I agree with Omre that, yes,
What happened?
Yes, when we
You're
review,
afraid your
we
people
then
agreeing
have
with
to.
you.
That's your problem.
Sorry, what did you say?
The strength, when we review with an intention to strengthen ourselves. And on an ongoing basis, that is norm. That if any organization, any business, any profession, you take stock and you review and you then strengthen yourself going forward. There shouldn't be something wrong with that. I don't think I don't think we can take what somebody said and what somebody said against what is formal and then say, therefore, that was the intention of what is formal. Because I think what is formal is very clear, and therefore there was never the intention that is intended to really suppress press freedom.
Thank you, Lupo. I think we can possibly take 2 questions, and then we will wrap it up. Very briefly, when 1 minute.
Why very briefly?
Everybody else has been
speaking.
Yes,
Just to correct you, Lumke, the African Union, you know that organization, said in fact it doesn't agree with self-regulation. But actually,
I didn't say what you're saying.
didn't you say the African Union?
Yes, I said there is international reference to that supports independent regulation. And I quoted from UNESCO to AU to yes, you know, it's about independent regulation to ITU to World Bank.
Hang on now, you just said what I want you to say. Closer to home, we said the African Union Statement of Principles on Freedom of Expression, which was accepted in Banjul in 2002, says effective self-regulation is the best system for promoting high standards in the media. So the African Union supports this, and that's a bunch of politicians, remember. On the question of the, you quoted from the Press Freedom Committee's review and coming to a conclusion. They actually didn't come to that conclusion because they did not interrogate any of the allegations that were made by the public at the public hearings against the press. They didn't ask questions, they didn't establish whether they were accurate or inaccurate for that matter. They didn't interrogate them, they just said, this is what the public said. And that gave, of course, a very wrong impression. Now, wait a minute. You're quoting the failures of the Press Council. Now, that, I think, stems from the fact that the ANC on one occasion, or maybe more than one occasion, said that the Press Council had ignored criticisms that they had made and complaints that they had addressed to the Press Council. We asked the ANC to present chapter and verse on that. Give us the examples of where we've ignored. They found one, what they said was an example. The problem with that was that it was a case that came before the Press Council and the ANC won it. The newspaper was at fault. So, the ANC, who inspired your views about the failure of the Press Council, itself couldn't even get its facts right. Now, I think Joe would have mentioned this if he'd had another 2 or 3 minutes. The number of complaints received this year, up to September 3, was 195. So we'll probably have just over, well, we will have over 200 by the time we get to the end of the year. In Ireland, which has got a much smaller population than South Africa, they get about 400 complaints a year. So if you're going to measure complaints as a mechanism of how good or bad the press is, have a look at those figures from other countries, and you can make a judgment on that. Incidentally, of the complaints that the Press Council, at least the Press Ombudsman deals with, 66% of the Ombudsman's findings are in favour, are against the press, are in favour of the complainant. So that you can hardly suggest, as you try to imply, but didn't actually say, that the Ombudsman is influenced by the ownership.
But I think these quantitative measures need to be questioned. Because what about all of these people that don't complain? Now I'll complain everything so that, we can...
But there must be some substance in it.
I mean, if you are going to look at quantitative issues, it public's use of the mechanism, and that should be promoted. One last question, very brief question, and then we'll conclude.
Actually, mine is a comment. I think somebody raised the issue that in the region, I come from Malawi, we look up to South Africa, and some of the things that are happening without the intention to do so have actually repercussions in the rest of the region on how regulation of the media is concerned. I can understand how in South Africa be comfortable, some will be comfortable with the independent route. Our experience in Malawi, even some of the independent institutions do not function as independent. We have a very good constitution, press freedom is enshrined in that constitution, but that did not stop our parliamentarians from enacting a law that is going to ban newspapers. And we had actually to go to court for that kind of thing. So I think that in the region, our mechanisms, my own company, we applied for a television license 3 years ago. An independent body could not decide, issued no television licenses, and it took the death of the former president for us to get a television license. So these are independent bodies. I thought I should.
You support the current president. Thank you.
Not necessarily. Thank you. But luckily, that section, it's 46 of the Penal Code.
Yes, it's been repealed now.
I have to say thank you very much to my all-male panel. This is not. I mean, I do acknowledge that we have focused here on the discussion in South Africa and in Southern Africa at large. But this is a global debate. But the concepts and discussions that emanated from here, we can apply it anywhere, and I hope that you found it fruitful. Please note that the discussions and the interactions do not end here. Our panelists will be here until Wednesday, so please feel free to engage with them. The papers, the